or otherwise, is yours.
Phone's on vibrate.
All right, ready. Thanks
Yes,
very much,
phone's on
guys.
vibrate, everyone.
As always, give your feedback to John and Ben. They'll route it to me, and we're hoping to make these, as awesome as we can. We're already hard at work on planning for the August one and even the September one. So stick around, guys. Good stuff's coming. All right. Take care, guys. Yeah.
Thanks, John.
Don't leaving me in this dark room to death. You guys sit there. So this first slide is only not that anybody's a dummy. It's just that everybody has to have a funny slide to get started. Also like to see a virtual show of hands of how many people actually went to Amazon and tried to look for that book.
So why not pitch
What I'm
it?
going to be talking about today is basically getting started with Enyo, and if time permits, a few advanced topics as well. Hoping to get into some things around localization and the Enyo event model and some other stuff. Just to introduce myself, because I've only talked to some of you guys briefly, my name is Robert Burdick. I'm one of the senior developer evangelists here in the, I think, newly anointed HP webOS Global Business Unit, I think is now what we're officially called. What that means I do is, events like this, so, outreach to developers, presentations, etc., but it's also, some technical support and, working with our business development teams to, bring some of our larger partners to the table as well, in addition to smaller individual developers. So it's kind of a little bit of a cross-section of all the stuff that the developer relations organization does. I'm involved with. Twitter handles there, I do occasionally say something relevant and interesting. And I guess by way of just logistics, before we get too deep in, first of all, you can see my screen, and also, are you hearing me okay?
Hearing is fine, screen looks great.
Okay, great. Now, of course, I'm not sure exactly how many people are pretty experienced or new or in between on all things webOS. So I think just real briefly, what I'll do is kind of blow through some basics. I'll skip that first slide and go into a more pretty one around what webOS is. Again, it's HP, Linux-based mobile operating system built from the ground up with web technologies as the driving force. The big win here, obviously, is as web developers with any of your traditional skills, HTML/HTML5, JavaScript, CSS, CSS3, those kinds of things, you instantly have got what it takes to start building mobile applications for devices like the HP touchpad, which is going to be our focus today. And then, of course, the operating system also built, with connectivity in mind, obviously, and cloud computing in mind. So as things move forward with HP and webOS living on not just mobile devices, but on other things that we've all heard and talked about, PCs, printers, and the like, you'll have, the skills and the ability to build, cloud-based connected applications and services with the same platform. Everything in webOS, again, is web-based, built on top of WebKit. We have a fairly well-endowed and standards-compliant WebKit engine, which drives all of your applications. Sitting on top of the V8 JavaScript VM from Google, and moving up the stack, you get into what's more interesting to web application developers, the frameworks. There's actually two, depending on what version of webOS you're developing for. So for stuff like your pre-2, your Veer, that are all based on some version of webOS 2.x, the development environment currently is Mojo. webOS 3.0 has introduced something called Enyo, which we're going to dive into here a little bit briefly. I mean, a lot more soon, not briefly. And from the application development perspective, though, whether you're doing Enyo or Mojo, the programming models are a little bit different, but for the most part, again, it's the same standards that you're used to, JavaScript, HTML, CSS. You can also do native development. So, if you look at the touchpad, for example, Angry Birds running there, Glow Hockey, applications like that you can get in the app catalog. These are all being based on OpenGL. And so there is a technology called the PDK, which lets you build C and C++ libraries or port OpenGL code, package those into plugins that can then be distributed as webOS applications. So if you're interested in native, higher performance, etc., really, high-performing animations and the like, native code is available to you. How to get started with development. The story got easier with the release of the touchpad and the public release of our SDK. All you need to do is go to our developer portal, developer.com.com, and one of the first things you're going to see there is a download button to grab the webOS 3.0 SDK, download all the bits, and start developing. So what's in that SDK? There's two pieces. What we're calling the SDK specifically for web applications is everything needed to build Enyo applications. So it's the Enyo.js libraries, all the code, etc., that implements Enyo. The PDK, again, I mentioned briefly, which is the tools and pieces needed to build native C or C++ applications. There's also now a hybrid model. There's an Enyo kind, and again, we'll get into what kinds mean in a minute, but there's an Enyo kind for hybrid applications, which lets you marry PDK content into an Enyo application or Enyo wrapper, so you can do both Enyo and native in one application if you like. There's a really solid emulator. Part of the SDK installation, download process, etc., is installing VirtualBox. And so basically what you've got when you're running the emulator is the emulator living on top of a Linux VM, which is the same image basically as that you have on the actual touchpad hardware. So to make a long story short, what that means is the emulation environment for webOS 3.0 development is extremely close to what you're going to get on the actual hardware. So things that aren't supported that you would need hardware for kind of getting to completion are some of the deeper integration with system services and things like that. Accelerometer, for example, is something that's a little bit hard to emulate, but for the most part, you can build your entire application in the emulator or in any decent WebKit-based browser. So I'll show how you can do actual development testing and debugging as well in Chrome or Safari. And of course, there's tons of sample code. I'll show you where that is and go through a couple of examples of that so you can get a sense of what's available. In terms of developer tools, you don't really need anything special as long as you've got your favorite text editor. I use Notepad++, and a decent browser. You can get started. If you're into Eclipse and Aptana, there are plugins for those that can be used. One caveat being they're not as complete and bulletproof for webOS 3.0 as they were for webOS 2, but the support is improving. Also, there's a tool called Aries that people ask about a lot. Aries is our web-based IDE for webOS development. Currently, however, it is supporting webOS 2, and the work to get it kind of up to snuff and working for webOS 3.0 is ongoing. Few setup tips. I'm going to kind of skip over those real quick because they're all documented. Some Chrome. Actually, I'll go back and some Chrome flags or some Safari flags that you can set. Things that allow file access from files to be able to do web service calls locally on your laptop, etc. as you're debugging. Also, a little bit about my environment. I typically have the SDK, the actual framework code, the JavaScript libraries for Enyo, in the path of a WAMP server. And I can show you that when I start building our first quickie Hello World app in Enyo. The reason I do this is it makes it easier for me to kind of version things, especially up to the public release of the SDK. We had internal drops of the SDK every week or so, and it was just easier to put each of those into my web server path and change one line of code pointing at the right version. And I'll show you how that works in a minute. So now a little bit about Enyo. So this is the new stuff for webOS 3. So if you're familiar with webOS in general, you have kind of a pretty good concept of what the platform is and what it does. What's sort of from a developer perspective, the big new item in webOS 3.0 is the Enyo Framework. So this is a new JavaScript UI framework for webOS 3.
We're now muted, so
it's basically,
go grab food.
think of it as the
So
the kind of prototype libraries for things like UI. There's UI components, lists, buttons, etc. There's also middleware components, things like WebView, kinds to do web services, DB8 stuff, etc. So it's a pretty rich library for building web applications. Very easy to code in, even simpler than Mojo. Mojo was easy enough as it was, but Enyo makes things even easier. And it's been pretty well dog-fooded by having all of the core built-in preloaded touchpad applications built in Enyo. So if you've seen the touchpad and have looked at, for example, the calendar application or the email client, these things are all built in Enyo. Let's jump in a little bit to what an application looks like. The basic application structure or architecture, if you will, consists of 4 or 5 components, one of which is optional. So first thing you have is an app.info.json file. So what this is a JSON formatted file which defines all of the metadata associated with your application. Things like a version number, a programmatic ID, or unique ID, etc. You need also your landing page, and so index.html is a typical file that people use, which is the file that gets loaded by the device or by the emulator when the application starts. There's something called depends.js, which is a JavaScript file that specifies and lists the set of files, JavaScript files, CSS files, etc., on which the application depends. And then the bulk of your application is implemented in one or more JavaScript source files, just like with the case of Mojo. And then optionally, since it's all web-based, you can style the look and feel of your comments, components, etc. using CSS. So let's take a quick look at building a simple, quick and dirty application. So what I'm going to do, I'm running Notepad++ and as my editor, and I'm going to pull up my file viewer here. And I've got sort of the boilerplate for a simple Hello World application already started, just kind of in the interest of time, so you don't have to watch me type up an index.html file, for example. What I'm going to start with is the app.info.json. So this file, again, is the application metadata. It's got a programmatic ID. This is basically the ID that the operating system recognizes the application by. When you install an app, receive an app, etc. This is how it's ID'd. Namespace is supported, so com.mycompany.application name, etc. Kind of naming convention, server, standard. Version number, things like that. The main property points to the landing page with the index.html that starts the application off. A title, and then there's a line here that's new, that's useful, called UI revision with a value of 2. What this basically does is it says take my application and format it full screen for the touchpad. If you take this line out and run the application on the device, what you'll see is your application running inside of a sort of an emulator, phone-looking, pre-looking emulator shell. So you want to have that value set, this UI revision 2 set, if you were deploying your application to the touchpad. My depends file. So I've already configured this to contain or point to the first source file in the application. And I have it in a folder called source, and then the name is mainview.js, which the name indicates the main view of the application. And then there's the index.html file. Now this is standard HTML. And basically, with a Enyo application, though, the HTML file is pretty minimal. Generally, just this line, script tag, that references the Enyo.js file in the framework, which is the top-level file that sucks in and includes all of the other stuff that's in the framework. And this line here, where I'm newing up my apps.mainView render into document body, we'll talk to in a second once I show you what main view is. But this is basically any Enyo object has a render into method that you can say render into a particular DOM element and therefore show on the screen. So what this is saying is my main view instance that I'm creating here